Tony Lester's death, marginalized and forgotten. Most of this information has been covered by investigative reporter Wendy Halloran, who's been waiting on the ICS video that's been sealed by the courts because of its horrific graphic contents. And to protect the family, it has not yet been released until the trial. How did I get involved in Tony Lester's death? I was contacted by the family through Tony's aunt, Patty Jones, who indirectly went through Mary Lou, who is the co-founder of David's Hope in Phoenix, Arizona. David Hope is a nonprofit mental health advocacy group which I have become a board member of to help them with their challenges to reform sentencing laws and change the way the mentally ill are treated in Arizona. I reviewed the entire packet provided by Patty Jones and the Lester family, and with the information reviewed, other than the ICS video that has been sealed, I concluded that there were over 1,000 pages of documents to go through, and the review and examination of graphic photos and the autopsy report, went through the medical analysis and the officer's reports, went through the investigative packet and listened to all the audio tapes of all the participants, and I looked at the disciplinary records and sanctions of this case and concluded that this was truly a highly preventable death inside an Arizona prison. Now, it's already been self-admit by the Arizona Department of Correction that his death was highly preventable, but what it fails to address and what it fails to tell the public is that this was a disaster with epic proportions. This is not a normal suicide, and I use the word normal suicide on purpose, as we'll get into that down the road. This was about Tony Lester needing treatment and was given lack of treatment, resulting in mistreatment of his incarceration term. He was deprived of his medication, his prescribed medication, and he was not housed according to a court order written by a judge that recommended that he be housed in a mental health unit for his mental health treatment and supervision. He was neglected for his mental illness. There was deliberate indifference towards his needs and his medical and psychological needs, and his need for compliance with his medication was overlooked and determined to be manipulative by the administration rather than purely based on the fact that he was having psychological difficulties coping and functioning in a general population yard. Tony Lester was abused. He was abused and tortured to death. He was abused and forced to endure multiple psychotic delusional episodes without his prescribed medication, making them extremely harmful and painful both mentally and physically. Yes, even in Arizona, prisoners can be tortured. Tony Lester was tortured as he bled to death by officers who offered him help when they found him gasping for air and bleeding profusely, but did nothing to stop the bleeding and did nothing to render first aid to try to stabilize him until the off-site Tucson Fire Department paramedics arrived at the scene. They didn't even call the on-site medical staff to assist them at the cell scene. Therefore, because staff did nothing except to walk and talk inside the cell while waiting on the EMTs to arrive and treat Tony's wounds to stop the bleeding, you can honestly say that Tony Lester was tortured to death inside an Arizona prison. Makes you want to ask the question, is there such a thing as a normal suicide? Is there a culture of death and desensitized conduct regarding the value of life inside Arizona prisons? The culture of death consists of suicides, homicides, and accelerated number of natural deaths due to lacking or delayed medical care and treatment. This is currently under review by outside advocacy agency, and I believe the department has already admitted that they have not been able to keep up with the demand to treat their prisoners in a timely and proper manner. A change in director caused a change in direction. I think this is self-explanatory. Is there a culture change? Well, since 2009, the focus of the prison culture has been us versus them, taking no prisoners in the process and letting them die. Don't take my word for it. Visit the website. Look at www.azcorrections.gov and look at the news releases showing the number of deaths. Then compare them to the number of deaths compared to pre-January 2009, and you will see a large increase in the number of people dying inside the prisons. Where's the accountability? Where's the transparency? Is there integrity? Is there ethical conduct? Where does the administration stand on the preservation of life? And does their training focus on saving lives or going through the motions? Has a human being's existence been marginalized for prison beds and profit? It's a question only those in charge can answer. But we have some questions for the governor. Governor, how would you feel if, because your son is mentally ill and safely secured inside a state hospital, how would you feel if he was sent to prison and he was deprived of his treatment and medication, neglected to be treated for his illnesses, and then abused and sentenced to endure his multiple psychosis while in prison, and then tortured to death by officers who refused to treat his wounds and stop the bleeding? How would you feel? Would you ask for better accountability? What would you do in this case? How valuable is a human being? Is your son more valuable than another human being? To some reason, I can understand it if the answer is yes. But does being a prisoner or a mentally ill person in Arizona prison condemn them to a death sentence? Tony Lester didn't deserve to die. He received a 12-year sentence, but in all reality, he received a death sentence because he was never treated. I have more questions for the governor. If Tony Lester was your son and he was killed and tortured like he was, would you be able to look into the eyes of your prison director and tell him you are satisfied with his discipline of giving these officers 80 hours loss of pay for the loss of his life? Or is his life priceless and valued? Or is there a double standard in Arizona? What is the value of a human being's life in the Arizona correctional justice system? Does it come down to 80 hours loss of pay or priceless?